Anyway, let's say welcome to Baruch. Baruch is, I believe you were born in this country, in the UK?
I was born in the Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea, and Earls Court Road.
Now you live in Israel, on the one kibbutz that's a member of the Masrorti movement.
Yeah.
That's the conservative Judaism, as we call it here in England.
No, we call it Masrorti Judaism.
When I was growing up, it was called conservative.
Yeah,
it's a long time ago. Now it's called Masrorti, and it's Masrorti means traditional.
Yeah.
Which is it's not. People are they keep to the commandments. I think they keep to all the commandments, but they're not as fanatical as, say, the ultra orthodox and the Haredi.
In most Masrorti communities, men and women are entirely equal. Women lead services, read from the Bible, from the Torah. It's totally.
Sounds almost like the Reform.
No, the Reform have it in whichever language, in whichever country they are. They have very little Hebrew, whereas ours is, let's not go
into we're not going to. I believe you're also involved with Yesh Atid, and you've been involved with a number of Israeli-Palestinian peace initiatives over the last few years, and it'd be good to hear from you where you think Israel is at the moment with the upcoming elections. I hear some very dire reports that Netanyahu is gaining more and more support, and what you think that will mean for the Israeli-Palestinian peace, whoever wins. Over to you.
Okay, well, let me say that, first of all, the opinion polls are invariably wrong in Israel. That's the first point to me. Netanyahu seems to have a tremendous influence with certain newspapers who publish reports, and you will see that he will be slowly gaining in the opinion polls until the last week, when suddenly it will drop off, because he will then want to frighten all his supporters into coming out and voting. And that is his known tactic. So I wouldn't take too much stock in the opinion polls. The private opinion polls of Yesh Atid are a lot healthier for the non-Netanyahu side of Israel. A lot will depend on the Arab vote, and there is an enormous effort among some organizations to increase the size of the Arab vote, to get our Arab citizens to come out and vote. At the moment, it's hovering, according to the opinion polls, a little under 40%. If it went up to 45 or 50%, it would tilt the scales very strongly against Netanyahu. It helps tremendously that the Prime Minister Lapid, is the leader of Yesh Atid. He's just given the most wonderful speech at the United Nations, as even the right wing, the Likud commentators have been saying. What was very marked was the difference in tone, was the inclusivity of Israel being for all peoples, all Jews and all Arab citizens. He talked for the first time for many years, as an Israeli prime minister, talked about the absolute need for a two-state solutions, 2 states for 2 peoples, that there has to be a way of peace. He used the Abraham Accords as an example, and he said, look who has the greatest advantages, those who have committed to the path of cooperation and peace, or those who are committed to war and destruction of another people or another nation. The senior advisor to Yair Lapid grew up in England. He's called Yair Zivan, and he was my first campaign director when I was the deputy head of the student organization Hillel and the Union of Jewish Students, and he's a good friend. And well, I'm sure that he wrote most of Lapid's speech this evening. How much can I say? If Lapid is re-elected and the coalition allows it, there will be moves towards negotiations with the Palestinians. That I can tell you. If Bibi Netanyahu manages to form a coalition, I won't say it will be disastrous for Israel because coalitions never last in Israel, but it will be very, very damaging for Israel. It will be damaging around the world for Israel. It will have some of the most extremist, I would even say fascist members of parliament who will become ministers. We're talking about two names, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are absolute racists, who believe and are disciples of the former Meir Kahane. I will, as I said once to his face, I will not call him rabbi because he had his rabbinical ordination revoked. Thank you, Mohammed. Yeah, it's wonderful. So it will set back the possibility of peace. One of the agreements, the only way that Netanyahu will be able to get a majority to build a coalition will be to allow more and more settlements to be built. I want to say a word about the settlements. When I first went to live in Israel, which was December 1974, I'm very, very old, by the way, even though I have a very, very young wife who's about 30 years younger than me. We have a little boy who's nearly 6. But when I first went to Israel at the age of 24, and after 4 years, I was one of the 4 founders of Peace Now, Israel's first major peace movement. And then I hated the settlements and hated the settlers and was absolutely convinced that a peace agreement needs to be signed and all the settlers need to be removed from the West Bank. When I returned to Israel 9 years ago, after many years back in England, I had changed my opinion, or I changed my opinion during the first year or two back in Israel. And it occurred to me that if Israel has a 20% Arab minority, there is no reason why a future Palestinian state should not have a 20% Jewish minority. The Palestinian Authority, who run Palestinian affairs in the West Bank, have a committee for interaction with Israeli society. The head of it, Mohammed al-Madani, is a member of the Palestinian Authority Executive of the Parliament, and they the committee send representatives all over Israel, wherever they're invited, to put the Palestinian point of view and to engage in friendly discussion. And I went to, the first year back, I went to a meeting in the town of Sachnin in the north. I'm in the beautiful Galilee, by the way. That's where my kibbutz is. And they gave their presentation. And at the end of it, I stood up and I said what I've just said to you about there being a Jewish minority. If the settlers prefer to be on what they consider holy land, rather than be part of the state of Israel, let them stay there as citizens of the state of Palestine. And al-Madani agreed with me. In fact, I can tell you that 4 years later, when I took a delegation from the student organization Hillel and the Union of Jewish Students, led by my son, Liron, to the Mukato, which is the parliament building in Ramallah, in the Palestinian area, and I repeated that view to al-Madani and Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority, who came into the room. And Abu Mazen allowed al-Madani to say, I entirely agree with you. And in fact, I would like to invite you to be the first citizen of the state of Palestine. I was in a bit of a a dilemma there. I thought, how do I, this wonderful offer, how do I refuse it? I thought for a moment and I said, this is the greatest honor I've ever been given in my life, but very respectfully, I decline it because I came to Israel to live in a Jewish state alongside, living peacefully alongside a Palestinian state. And that was accepted. So that is the view of the Palestinian Authority. There is no need to remove all the settlements. An article was published today in the Jerusalem Post by somebody called Gershon Baskin, who you probably know the name, some of you. He brokered the deal with Gaza, with Hamas, to release the prisoner Shalit, Gilad Shalit, a few years ago. He's in constant contact with Gaza, and he wrote today something of the same. We're friends. We chatted about it afterwards. He said that there needs to be some kind of mechanism that the settlers can be citizens of Israel, but residents of Palestine, and refugees who will be allowed to come back to Israel, Palestinian refugees, can be the same, or have dual nationality or something like that. And that is a possible solution. He posited it, that there is no way of removing the 100,000 settlers. But by the way, the total number of settlers at the moment, including in East Jerusalem, is about 100,000, which is just over 1%. The population census has just been published, as it is every year, for the Jewish New Year, for Rosh Hashanah, and we are almost at 10 million people in the state of Israel. The settlers count for 1%. So as somebody wrote not very long ago, it is ridiculous that 1% is leading 99% by the nose. So that's the situation. If Lapid succeeds in building a coalition, we will move closer and closer towards peace negotiations. If Netanyahu gets in, it will go in the opposite direction. But, and the very big but, is whether Netanyahu can succeed in changing the makeup of the law enforcement and the legal organizations in Israel to get out of the I forget my English to get out of the court case, which every day is proving more and more that he was guilty of fraud, that he was guilty of a whole range of things for which there is only one possible punishment. He will go to prison at the end of the trial. So he needs to somehow, that his coalition will be based. He will give ministries to parties that agree to vote to change the makeup of the courts, to change the authority of the courts, to keep him out of jail. And let's make it absolutely clear, Netanyahu is accused. I can't say in a public forum my view. What I will say is that back those years ago when I first lived in Israel, by the end of the 70s, I was a journalist for the Jerusalem Post. I had a regular Friday column. And a few months after Netanyahu came back to live in Israel, he was at MIT in America, and he came back after the Entebbe raid, if people know what that is, when Israel managed to release a hijacked plane that had been flown to Entebbe, and the one Israeli casualty was his brother, Yoni Netanyahu, and Bibi Netanyahu came back to Israel, and I uncovered fraud by him, and I wrote a whole article about it, for which he responded in the press 2 days later that I was a traitor to the state of Israel, a whole load of terrible things. This is Bibi Netanyahu being on the wrong side of the law is not something new. This is something over 40 years. Obviously, I'm not biased, but my friends in the law enforcement agencies tell me that the case is watertight, that it's becoming daily from every witness more and more watertight, he is in serious trouble. And that is why he will do anything to build a coalition and promise anything to anybody so he can be in power, can appoint a justice minister who will probably be the very right-wing fascist Ben-Gvir as justice minister, who will, I don't know how he'll do it, but he will try to keep him out of prison. So that's where the prospects are at the moment.
Yeah, about the settlers, you say there's about 100,000.
Yeah.
How many of those are living in the major cities like Malay Adumim,
Ariel
and Modi'in? Are there for financial reasons?
Modi'in is on our side of the Green Line.
I think part
Modi'in Elite.
Oh, Modi'in Elite, yeah.
Which is quite a way up the road.
Yeah.
Into the West Bank. It is not.
Okay.
A very good majority. Quite a lot in East Jerusalem as well now, in Har Homa and new areas of Jerusalem that have been built on the road to Bethlehem. A lot around Gush Etzion. My own son lives in Tekoa, which is the furthest part of Gush Etzion. It's nearly in Jerusalem, in fact. Although he's quite left-wing in his views, he's a doctor. Most of his friends that he works with are from the Arab communities.
My memories of Tekoa are running around in my army fatigues, but that's another story.
I was one time responsible for the Har Gilo, which controlled Bethlehem and all that area. So I know exactly what you mean. But Tekoa is actually pretty left-wing. Yeah, so some of the hilltop settlements, I'm sure in a peace agreement would go. And in fact, the most recent ones are being dismantled all the time.
I've got two questions about the settlements. One is that if the inducements are right, well, all these people who live in these settlements or the major settlements who were there for economic reasons, and they were said that, okay, we'll build a new city at the northern end of the Negev somewhere and allow these people the same conditions to live in these cities there. Would many move away if we said, and we're going to give the West Bank or occupied Palestine, however you want to call it, back to Palestine? Would they stay in there or would they move? If the right inducements were in place?
I think many would. But you'll still be left with 50, 60,000 or 70,000 who wouldn't. Okay. Let me make it quite clear, and it's a reason why I am able to talk, and I do quite often, to young people in the settlements. I believe in what is called Eretz Israel Shlema, the whole land of Israel. The whole land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. I have no doubt about it. Yeah, for all types of reasons. But that same land, and we're talking about all the land from the Lebanese border down to the southern Negev, from the sea up to the Jordan River, all that land also belongs to the Palestinian people, who have been there, not all of them, but many of them, for at least 1,400 years. It's about 45 generations. So they also have a right to all the land. And as Abba Eban once said, and allowed me to expand in the Jerusalem Post article all those years ago, there are only three possible logical solutions. There are no other. Either whoever is the strongest kills the other ones or keeps them in slavery, or we all live together in one wonderful, harmonious, large state. If you forget about the first one, because as Jews, we're not allowed to go and kill everybody else, and we're not allowed to keep other people in slavery because we were slaves in Egypt. And personally, if you cut out the second one, because I came to Israel to live in a Jewish state, in my nation state, with my customs and my festivals, my language. If you discount those first two solutions, there is only one other solution. Both sides have to give up what they believe is theirs. They have to give up part of what they believe to be theirs for the sake of a greater value of living in peace, of recognizing the pain of another people, of recognizing the rights of another people. Both sides have to do that. That's not talking about borders. That has to be the basic tenet of the two peoples. And I find that young settlers accept that once they understand that I believe in that it all belongs to us. And I have a cat climbing in through the window. Sorry about that.
There's nothing wrong with a cat. I think Alexandria will agree with me.
We have three, and one of them is not very nice, very naughty.
My other question is more about what's happening with the Israeli security forces, especially in the West Bank. I hear too many reports, and I've seen too many videos where I see soldiers and border police allowing settlers, especially the more extreme settlers, to attack Palestinians, and then intervening to stop Israelis and Palestinians defending their own land which isn't under any which is not part of any settlement. And crimes against Palestinians are not being investigated. The uprooting of olive trees, the burning of crops, the blocking of watercourses. Why aren't the Israeli security forces, the IDF, which I was proud to be a soldier in the IDF in my time. Why aren't they taking more of an effort to stop the Jewish terrorists, because I can't think of any other word for them, attacking Palestinians?
I totally agree with you, Leon. It's one of the most painful things that I have to deal with. By the way, I now work for the Forum of Peace Organizations, the umbrella organization over most of the peace organizations in Israel. We have got them, the different various organizations working together for the first time, and not each one going in their own way. We push strongly for the IDF to intervene. It is a lot of my WhatsApp messages to Yair Lapid's senior advisor, as I said, Yair Zivan, deals with that situation, deals with the image it's creating for Israel abroad. And there have been changes over the last month or two, especially once he became prime minister. And once he didn't have to keep Bennett from Bennett's party, Yamina, in the coalition. Unfortunately, well, Yair Lapid sees the long view. I should mention one word about Israel's prime minister, for those who don't know. And the reason that even though I've refused for a long time to join Yesh Atid, when I came back to Israel, his assistant, Yair Zivan, wrote to me and said, welcome back to Israel, Baruch, you've got to join Yesh Atid. And I said, don't be ridiculous, I'm far to the left of Yesh Atid. In the end, he was right. But I always admired Yair Lapid because he was the leading commentator, talk show host, political talk show host in Israel, earning a fantastic salary, incredibly popular. And people criticized him and said, all you do is criticize, it's easy to talk, it's easy to criticize, you don't do anything. And one day he woke up and he said, you're right. And he spoke to his wife and children, he said, what would you think if I gave it all up? And I went into politics to try and change things. And that's what he did. And I admire that tremendously. So he takes the long view. It pains him every time he reads a report about IDF soldiers doing things they shouldn't do. But he knows he needs to build a strong party, a strong coalition, in order that he can intervene and still keep the coalition going. And it's one of the problems of coalition politics, not just in Israel, in many countries. Sweden's going through the same thing at the moment. Not quite the same thing because it doesn't have another population. But there is police brutality in Sweden against new immigrants. I've been reading a lot about that. It is a problem. It's a world problem between, as LDfP put it, between center, not even left and right, between center and fanaticism. And unfortunately, in many countries, we have fanaticism. Listen, we don't know what Liz Truss is going to turn out to be like. As a Foreign Secretary, she was pretty vociferous. Who knows what she's going to turn out to? I think you wrote something, Leon, about her.
I've written many things about her, yes. She's a bit of a weather vane. She will go whichever way the wind blows and is pushed, and whichever way she thinks the votes lie.
Well, during the campaign, she made some anti-Semitic trope, like she was invited to a Jewish community and she was appealing to their natural instinct to create businesses. Something like that, which lots of Jewish students complain because obviously it's like the natural trope that Jewish people are rich and businessmen and they all want to create. And then I think it was just before the Queen died, she was saying that all Labour leaders were men and from North London, which so they had nothing to say about diversity and equality or something like that, which North London is a very important Jewish community. So yeah, she assumed that all, which is not true, but it's just like what.
Wow, I didn't read that. I can't think of any Labour leader from North London personally.
Well, I think it was not true, but even like just
the only one I can think of is the new Barnet councillor who happens to be my son, Velleman.
Well,
yeah, but even if it was true, what would be?
I think it was referring to the fact that Blair and Corbyn, and she thought, and she was trying to include Starmer. Anyway, they all live in Islington.
She was like complaining about anti-Semitism and blah 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 to the Jewish students, and then we're appealing to their sense of business, and
she will say
they didn't like it and they complained.
Yeah. I find with Truss, she will say whatever she thinks the audience wants to hear, and wherever she thinks the votes are. I think there's absolutely no intellectual thought or process behind it. She's at the moment she's, as Johnson was before her, enthralled to the extreme right wing of the Tory party. I
don't think she's as dishonest as Boris.
I think Mohammed wants to
not as personally dishonest, but politically.
Mohammed wants to talk. I think he has his hand up for a long time.
Sorry, Mohammed.
Baruch, I'm an accountant by background, which makes me very pedantic about data. And I was quite surprised by your figure of 100,000 settlers in the West Bank, because it was different from my recollections. So while you were speaking, I did a quick search, and the Jewish Virtual Library, B'Tselem, and Wikipedia, which is actually pretty reliable most of the time, all quote much higher numbers in the region of between 500,000 and...
I'm just looking myself, 450,000. I read 100,000 today, I don't know why. I also looked at it. 450,000, it says, excluding East Jerusalem.
Yeah. And about 200,000 in East Jerusalem.
Okay, wow, that's... But I've got another thing saying 214,000. Well, it depends who you believe.
But the figure I've always read in newspapers for many years is about 500,000.
It says 500,000, we're talking about 5%. So it's still 5%.
Yeah.
5% leading 95%.
That's right, but it's very different from 1%.
But this is why Gershon Baskin wrote, as only yesterday, I think it was yesterday's.
It was in today's paper. I read it this morning. And,
it's today's paper. I'm not
Yeah.
a great fan of the Jerusalem Post anymore, even
Well,
though I
me-
used to write for it, because it became very right-wing. I read the Times of Israel. But as he wrote, there is no need to remove settlers who want to live in the state of Palestine. Why should the state of Palestine? Well, okay, this is what I said back in that meeting in Sachin 9 years ago. I said, why should Palestine be Judenrein?
I agree.
Why should anywhere be Judenrein? So why should Palestine, which is also our holy land, be Judenrein? Why should you not have a minority if they want to be Palestinian citizens of the state of Palestine? And okay, Gershon is in his article talks about dual nationality and being residents of one and citizens of another. Okay, that's all part of negotiation. But I think I agree with him that there is, and as I said, the Palestinian Authority has said to me, Abu Mazen himself has agreed there is no need for them all to leave, provided there is a Palestinian elected government over the whole of the area of the West Bank with land swaps, whatever it is. So it doesn't really matter whether there's 100,000 or 400,000. There are about, in the West Bank and Gaza, there are about 5-6 million Palestinians, if I'm right.
Yes.
It's a small minority. And it would seem to be the most sensible solution, provided that the Jewish people who live in Palestine have equal rights, as at least by law the Arab citizens of Israel have. I'm not saying there isn't discrimination. The same thing if you apply, as Alexandrine said, if you apply for a job, it's getting better, but if you apply for a job in many places in Israel and your name is Mohammed, you won't get to the interview. If you say your name is Tzvi or Leon, then you'll get the interview. But as Lapid said in his speech, there are High Court judges. The judge that sentenced former President Katsav to prison was a Muslim Arab. There are Arab members of parliament, Arab ministers, Arab doctors, Arab everything. My closest friend, one of my closest friends who we started studying social work, after Mohammed, I also studied, I'm a management accountant, an FCIMA. But I studied in Israel, I studied social work and met on the first day somebody called Faisal Aziza, who's now Professor Faisal Aziza, just retired as the Dean of the Faculty of Alternative Medicine at Haifa University, absolutely Vice Chair of the Council of Higher Education. An Arab citizen of Israel can reach any position in Israel. And that's not to decry the discrimination that goes on. And so I would hope that a Jew in Palestine would be able to do the same. That's what we have to aspire to.
Agreed.
Mohammed, actually, Mohammed here, is on record. He's on record as, in fact, having said, which was a very poignant thing some time ago, that of all the countries of the world, of all the countries in the Middle East, the only country he'd feel comfortable living in would be Israel. I remember when Mohammed said that at one of our meetings. Any liberal-minded person who believes in democracy and freedom wants to live in a democratic and free country. It's like any Russian at the moment would rather live anywhere in Eastern Europe other than Russia, which is why some of them are trying to get out as we speak, rightly, trying to get out of there. But what I was going to ask you, Baruch, to take up whether we, look at it from an accurate point of view with the numbers. One of the things that I've always been struck by, talking about wearing different hats, I also work for something called the Ustinov Prejudice Awareness Forum, which was started by Sir Peter Ustinov and is now run by his son. It was originally a university-based.
One of my favorites.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I work with his son Igor, who's an artist and is carrying on his legacy. It started as a project at Durham University and has now moved. It's actually grown, and it's more than it was then. It was then an academic study. Now it's an actual online organization. And one of the things that strikes me I work in the cultural field, both in performing and writing, and historically, one of the wonderful things about, let's say, ambassadors who are from the cultural side rather than the foreign office side, people like Peter Ustinov, who worked as a UNICEF ambassador, they tend to get entree into the psyche and the cultural feel of people in a way that sometimes the more dry and politically oriented ambassadors can't do. One of the things we've done in this group, or Leon particularly has done a wonderful job with, is inviting different people to speak who are clearly involved in cultural exchanges, often younger people. What do we do, Baruch, about the fact that we're relying always on these fabulous politicians like the current Prime Minister, and then awful politicians like Netanyahu, when it would seem to me, on the ground, people like you coming to these meetings seem to have a far more open-hearted and open-minded way forward, regardless of whatever your religious perspective is or ethnic group. And we've had people who are agnostic and atheists. We've had people who are Palestinians. We've had people who are Arab Jews and Jewish Israelis. And they all seem to agree on one thing, that when people start talking to each other and getting on with each other, then we can make some progress. And what I'm wondering is, we don't seem to have much, other than one can remember several years ago, Daniel Barenboim with his orchestra. We don't seem to have much that ever says to Palestinians, we understand you, we know you, we get on with you. And equally from Palestinians, the same with Israelis. And even within Israel, we hear nonsense reported, usually from, as you rightly say, Baruch, far left sort of Corbyn types, that actually Arabs are not happy in Israel. Arab citizens of Israel are actually discriminated against almost in some untoward way. What we never hear is the positive stuff. And my view is that what we always hear also about the settlements is that it's full of fanatics. It's full of people whose origins came from Russia and are the most hardline Jews. And my understanding from what you've just said today, Baruch, and I've heard other liberal-minded citizens of Israel say the same, that it's, again, a mixed bag. And as liberals, we don't want to paint them all as being one thing. What do you therefore say, Baruch, to the idea that we need to do more with regard to cultural exchanges within that region? And also with regard to the, if you like, open-mindedness or otherwise of the people living in those settlements? Apologies for the very long intro to that.
No,
there are two questions there.
No, gives me a chance to think of the answer. No.
Thank you.
First of all, I'm always pleased to accentuate the positive. I spend enough of my time fighting the negative in Israel, fighting against the type of thing that Leon talked about.
Yeah.
But there are so many examples. Yesterday evening, I was at a demonstration in a town near us called Tivon with, I shouldn't actually say this publicly because he's not meant to be there, but I'll talk about him because he wasn't there. Yeah, he definitely wasn't there. Ishmael Chaldi, who comes from the Bedouin town of Khawalid. That's where the name Chaldi comes from. Some of you, I don't know if anybody recognizes the name, Leon. He was the consul general of the Israeli embassy in London back in, I came back in 2013, 2011, 2012. He was before that the consul general in Los Angeles. He then was appointed the ambassador to Eritrea, and has just been appointed the ambassador to, I can never get the name right, Tajikistan, next to Kazakhstan.
Tajikistan?
Yeah, Tajikistan. He's just been appointed ambassador there. the first Bedouin Israeli to achieve such a high level in the foreign ministry. But again, showing that you can achieve anything. The reason for the demonstration on the other side was because the Nature Reserves Authority have come up with a plan to designate all the area between Tivon, which is in kind of the center of the Galilee, southern Galilee, up to the sea, as a nature reserve. This will impact tremendously negatively on the Bedouins who own a lot of fields there and where they graze their flocks. And he is very angry at the moment that that Lapid and the letters, the leaflets we were giving out to anybody who came past were addressed to the Prime Minister. What are you doing about it? So he was very angry about it. But listen, this is a guy every year in Hawalid, in 2 weeks' time in Sukkot, in the Festival of Tabernacles, he will be hosting a sukkah, a peace sukkah in his village. And then in Hanaton, in my kibbutz, we will be inviting him back to our peace sukkah, where he will give a talk about the life of a Bedouin. So there are so many wonderful examples. As I said before, there is discrimination, but more and more of Israel's Arab population are being highly educated. The universities are a place of total equality. You're more likely to be treated by an Arab doctor than a Jewish doctor if you go to hospital here. Doctors, nurses, all working together to save lives, side by side. There are so many wonderful examples. I have a massive argument with the largest, it's not one party, the joint list, which is made up of 3 parties now, or in fact it's only 2 parties running the next election, who say they will not join the coalition. And I've said to the leader of them, you are mad. You would, if you had joined Yair Lapid's coalition, you would have had 1 or 2 ministries. The amount of good you could have done for the Arab communities would have been enormous, rather than just shouting, which is all you do. And
Well,
I'm still having that argument.
It's easier to sit on the sidelines and shout than to
Yep.
roll your sleeves up and get stuck in and do the work.
Exactly right.
But minorities in any country have good and bad situations. The Jewish minority in Britain, you know, one of the reasons I like living in Israel, I wanted to be in the majority. When at the end of the evening's programs on television, I want my announcer to say Laila Tov. I want him to say on Monday afternoon, Shana Tova. I don't want him to say, well, I've got a moth. I don't want him to say Merry Christmas or Happy Easter, however much we went to our friends in Nazareth from outside the window behind, well, it's behind you actually. I can see Nazareth on the hills looking out of my window here. We enjoyed the Christmas celebrations there. And I love going as a guest, but not as part of the majority culture. I don't know if that makes any sense. So in England, as Alexandrine talked about, there is anti-Semitism. Who would have thought that the Labour Party, that my parents supported from the 50s, which I supported, I was treasurer in my years back in England, I was treasurer of the Labour Party in Enfield for about 10 years. My son followed, he was canvassing for Stephen Twigg, the poster boy for Tony Blair's election at the age of 2. And now he's a Labour councillor in Barnet and is being high-tracked. You may still get a Jewish Prime Minister one day.
Something on that, Baruch, just for one second, just to jump in there for 1 second. How does your son, I mean, what sort of age is your son and how does he feel about it now and how long has he been a member of the Labour Party?
Okay. So my son's 27, young councillor. He I said to him, you know, when I was back here many times, if I were back in England, I would resign from the Labour Party. I would have voted Lib Dem. But he said, no, Dad, I'm going to stay and fight it. I'm not going to let them win. And he did, and they won. And they got him out. And they got a lot of, you know, Keith Starmer, I don't agree with everything he's done, but he's doing a pretty good job of kicking out the anti-Semites from the Labour Party. So all credit, you know, I'm proud of him and his friends, not just him. There's a whole group of young councillors now in Barnet.
Excellent.
Many of them who were friends of his, who were part of the Union of Jewish Students. So they were my chanichim, my young charges, and I'm very proud of them all. But it's something you have to deal with, and I say it quite openly. I'm very pleased to live in Israel. If I'm called a traitor by Netanyahu, I'm proud of it because it's my country. I would say far more than his. I've said it to him, far more than his country. But I don't know whether you want to hear more things about Netanyahu. One thing you might like to know is that when the previous Likud Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, was accused of bribery, of taking bribes, before he was actually charged, when he was just accused, Netanyahu stood up in the Knesset and said any honorable man who is accused of a crime like this would resign and fight it, even if he's innocent, fight it and not taint the office of Prime Minister with it. And Olmert said, you are right, and resigned.
But that means Netanyahu isn't honourable.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
By his own words, he is not an honourable person.
He is not an honourable person in any shape or form. Some of the evidence that's been coming out from the secretary, the personal assistant to Packer, who gave him so many presents, and the way she described how he and Sarah Netanyahu would give a list of what they demanded, diamond necklaces, in order to have a meeting with him. They would demand lists and lists of presents. Quite. It's embarrassing that man should be a leader of a leader of a major political party. And Begin, Menachem Begin, who I obviously never supported in those days, is turning in his grave. Menachem Begin, for those who don't know, was the Likud leader, the right-wing leader, who was a terrorist before the State of Israel and eventually came to power.
Yes. In fact, when they started Likud, as you could see from Begin's son, they weren't really this sort of as right-wing as they are now at all. It's a little like the Republican Party in America. It's funny because my wife's originally from America and my father was Italian. When Berlusconi first came on the scene, goodness knows how many years ago, when I was a youth, I remember thinking, who's this jerk, for goodness sake? And of the three assholes, pardon my language on this lovely grouping that we have here to descend to that, but I feel so strongly about it. I've seen my father's Italy, and then my wife's America, and now we see it obviously with Israel. They're almost like identikit of each other, but it's funny, in retrospect, Berlusconi's looking like the better of the three out of Trump, Netanyahu, and Berlusconi. I can't believe I said that, but it is actually true. It's unbelievable.
You can add to that Modi in
yes,
India,
you could. Actually, very good point. Although on a personal level, I suspect Modi is a man of some greater integrity than these guys, who are all more sleazy guys, I think.
Well, I've been talking about there was the quartet of terrible leaders of Trump, Putin, Netanyahu, and Johnson. Well,
Putin's another story altogether, I think, because he's not even democratic in the slightest. I think we're putting him more with Mussolini, I think, than the other group. But Putin. It's interesting because in France recently, as we've heard before from Alexandrine, even Le Pen, I don't think, is in that category, because the one thing about Le Pen is she's better than her father, at least. So I think some of these other guys, they're getting worse and worse and worse. I mean, Trump, the latest, it's funny, as you were saying it, Baruch, about...
I mean, I think Le Pen keep quiet because she wants to get in. I don't think she's any better. And her niece, Marion
might be right.
Maréchal, is absolutely the worst. Is absolutely the worst.
I think in also to this wonderful grouping, you can add in Erdogan in Turkey. I mean, there's so many of them.
Erdogan and Lapid sat down at the United Nations, a very friendly talk. We've swapped ambassadors again. We've signed a whole load of trade agreements, and all my friends who go to Turkey say it's an absolutely wonderful place, and Jews are very respected. So he's not as bad as some of the others.
The thing, though, I think that worries me, or any of us should, the situation today after the Putin announcements yesterday.
Yeah.
We all thought, I certainly did, growing up in Britain as a politically aware and active person as a kid, and getting interested in this subject, particularly amongst many other foreign policy issues. I think we all thought that the powder keg and the problematic region was the Middle East, but who would have thought it would end up being, having seen, obviously, 60 years of Cold War when no one actually threatened the use of nuclear weapons on either side to that level, to see it happening now. Where do you see, Baruch, this idea that Netanyahu could be turned to again as a prime minister when the world seems so desperately to need mainstream? That phrase you mentioned that Lapid has said, it's centrists versus, it's almost like we're all centrists now. I mean, I identify very strongly as being in the center ground anyway, even in our own party here, the Liberal Democrats. You have people who are convinced that we're a left-wing party, or that we have to say we're liberal first. I say I'm in the mainstream center ground, and I'm slightly left of that, but I sit down with any moderate center-right conservative and any moderate centrist Labour person before I'll go down any extreme road. So why would a country like Israel, that has got such a horrifying history of division and problematic situations, why would they, when we're seeing this monstrosity that's running Russia and these assorted fools and despots, why would they turn away from a good guy like Lapid, whose trajectory, as you rightly say, Baruch, is fantastic, a mainstream media figure, an intelligent guy in the middle age of the prime of life? Why would they turn to this ridiculous, discredited, corrupt, semi-despotic guy again? Why can't even Likud come up with, like the Tory party here, at least leader after leader, and reinvent themselves like Italy have done with their centre-right and their idiot movements? At least they haven't stuck with Berlusconi.
I think all of Israeli politics, going back even to the 50s and 60s, well, certainly to the 50s and 60s, nearly all the parties have been personality-led.
Right.
Whether it's Ben Gurion.
No, this is a question, Leon.
Golda Meir.
It's a question I've been asked many times. My wife asks me.
Yeah.
Israel, there are a couple of answers. Israel is still suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Israelis, Jewish Israelis are still in trauma from the Holocaust, from Arab aggression for many years. Even though the true histories are coming out of what happened in the War of Independence, as I point out to my Arab friends, let us not forget that every country in 1948, every single country in the Middle East said, we will destroy the new state. We will make sure we will drive every Jew into the sea. They said it again in 67, they said it again in 73, and 73 took a lot of winning. We hear it from Hamas all the time, we hear it from Hezbollah all the time. And all that does is strengthen the trauma already existing from the Ashkenazi Jews, who are only second or third generation survivors of the Holocaust, and the Jews of Arab countries who were unceremoniously thrown out of their homes where they'd lived for 1,000 or 2,000 years.
Yes.
So that is one answer. Why Netanyahu, as a demagogue, is able to appeal to the fears of the Jewish people. Bless you, livriut, lavriut, or livriut. I hope Leon's all right. Wow. So that's one of the answers.
It's a good one.
The other reason is that Netanyahu has built around himself a group of leaders or a group of people who are beholden to him. Who knows what, in his Machiavellian way, what hold he has over so many. And we're not just talking about his assistants in parliament, Amsterdam and people like that, David Bitton. We're talking about mayors of towns and leaders of councils. So there is, he also promises to, especially to the religious parties, the earth. He has said to the Haredi parties, if you join me, I will give you enormous largesse, and you don't have to teach any non-Jewish, any subject that's not, or any of the subjects on the regular curriculum, English, maths, science, history. You can just carry on with your teaching Talmud and nothing else.
Wow.
So that's very, 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 what's the word? Again, when you live so many years in Israel, you do forget the English word. You forget the English language. That is very attractive to them.
Yes.
But we know that's his reason for doing this is that he knows that if he goes to prison, he will have a terrible time. So, and he believes it. He believes in his own delusions. So he believes that he is king. He believes he is King Bibi.
Mm.
You know, he's a megalomaniac. He's a narcissist. He's very much led by his wife, who is not a nice person. He has two sons, or he has three sons. One you never hear anything about. One is actually doesn't agree with his father, keeps very, very quiet. And one is one of the nastiest pieces of work you could ever find anywhere in the world. Yeah, Netanyahu. Absolutely. So I'm not sure. As I said at the beginning, don't believe all the opinion polls. A lot of them are put out by Likud. And because his tactic is to build up a swell of support, everybody thinks it's going wonderfully for him. And in the last week, you'll suddenly see, oh my God, we're in trouble. So that all the supporters will come out to save them. Mm. The famous thing, they're bussing them in, meaning the Arabs, they're bussing them in. It's a total lie. He went to the heads of the Arab, the leaders, the organization of heads of Arab local authorities afterwards and said, I'm sorry, it was put out by somebody else. I shouldn't, didn't come from me. Well, we actually heard it from his voice. There is a third figure, by the way, in Israeli politics now, who may have a say, is what the press is saying, and that's Benny Gantz, who has been taken in by Netanyahu already once. Mm. And his whole election campaign is, he is the only one who can bring everybody together. That he can bring in the religious parties as well, and he could build a coalition, not including Netanyahu. Some people have posited that Netanyahu this time will persuade Benny Gantz to join him by doing what Lapid did, saying, you be Prime Minister first. Now, whether Gantz would be amenable to that, I have no idea. I'm not convinced of Gantz, although he was an excellent chief of staff. He has been a good defense minister in most things, not in the way he doesn't rein in the IDF from the excesses they carry out on the West Bank. But for Israel's security, he's contributed an enormous amount. So there are different possibilities.
When is the election likely to be? Sorry, I just wanted to ask that one thing. When is the election likely to be, do you think?
The election is on the 1st of November.
It's on the 1st of November. I've just been invited to that night after the election closes. I've been invited to be in charge of the Carmiel count. I will spend the whole night supervising a team, counting and making sure that the votes are correct and that ballots haven't been spoiled, etc.
That is something I think we've all done in the past for the Lib Dems at elections. It's great fun.
Well, I'm not doing it for Yesh Atid. I'm doing it I had to sign that I'm not an official member of any party in order to do it.
One question. If, as you seem to suggest, it is likely that Netanyahu will be sent to prison soon when his court, I mean, I don't know how long the court is dragging on, very long time.
No, we're talking another 2 or 3 years because whatever the verdict is, and we've only had the prosecution at the moment.
But then it will be appealed.
The defense have to start. So that will take another 6 months or something. And then whatever the verdict, if it goes against him, there will be appeals. And he won't go to prison until the end of all the appeals.
But if
it's a long process,
let's just say if Netanyahu doesn't win this election and doesn't get it, then he's not really won an election for Likud for
over 4 years.
Over 4 years.
He's lost 4 elections.
Yeah.
If he loses a 5th one, most people think that the Likud will say, "That's it, you're out."
Who will replace him? And will they be any better?
The $1 million question. The $1 million question. Who is capable of? I know who wants to.
I think there's a lot of them who want to. But
well, one person who has a very, very she's very focused on it, and she's called Ayelet Shaked, who apologized yesterday for joining Lapid's coalition. Said, "I've returned home." She came to speak to our pre-army course before the last election, of which I went along to observe and spoke to her afterwards, and we didn't agree. She's a lawyer. I said she knows a lot about law and knows very little about justice.
Didn't her new party fail to?
Nobody's failed yet. So it didn't get off the ground, and she's now joined Likud.
Oh, she has actually joined Likud. Is she on the list?
Actually, has she? No, she hasn't. You're right. She's what's Shaked done? Golly, it changes. She changes every other day. Shaked. I mean, she's still staying as the interior minister. She was in Jewish Home. Is she staying in Jewish Home?
Yes, I'm just looking on the Wikipedia for the list. She's still the #1 on Jewish Home.
Yeah. So,
but they don't seem to.
No, they won't pass the threshold. I think that if she sees, she can't join the Likud list at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of Ayelet Shaked in any shape or form. But she would like to be. Golly, there are some terrible candidates to in Likud. I don't know whether anybody could wrest the Likud back towards centre-right. I would love to see somebody like Benny Begin come back in.
He's stepping down entirely this time round, isn't he?
Yeah. But I don't know. Maybe Bennett would go back to Likud, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult in Likud to see his centralized power so much. It's very difficult to see who is strong enough in Likud to take over. Somebody who would like to, we don't know whether he will be allowed to keep his spot high up on the Likud list, is our neighbor here in Hanaton, who brought down the government, really. Why's his name gone from my brain for a moment? That's terrible. Shikli, Amichai Shikli, who I can, round the corner, if I look outside the door, I can see his house over there. He's a friend. He came to, Shoshana and I got married a year and a half ago. He was at our wedding. We disagree totally on politics. He's a strong man, though, strong, intelligent man, even though we disagree on many aspects of politics. There are things we agree on strengthening the Galilee, but the Galilee and the Negev region. But very difficult to see. He's surrounded himself by acolytes who are not particularly intelligent. Netanyahu has.
I think we've seen something similar with Johnson here, but it didn't seem to work. But now, unfortunately, those acolytes who weren't very intelligent are now leading the British government.
Yes, although listen, Truss had a fairly good degree, I understand.
Yeah, she's not. I think she's not the worst of them, Baruch. I think Leon's got some others in mind who are even worse than her by far. Horrible.
Well,
I think
let's not say the word Suella Braverman. No, don't.
No, yeah, well, okay.
And Rees-Mogg, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's even
did he understand what an average person buys from the supermarket? Does
Does Rees-Mogg even understand what a supermarket is?
It's unbelievable. I mean, when you think about it, somebody like
the servant tells him he orders from the supermarket.
But the thing is, you see, Winston Churchill was an aristocrat, and yet he had something that none of these people would have in a million years. He had mainstream politics, and he had gravitas, and he also had an understanding and a popular touch. The trouble with this Tory party is it's chased a certain direction because of Brexit, but it seems to literally not have a clue until it's pointed out to them. And then it does the right thing on one or two issues, which keep it in power. So, for example, she's done something good on the energy situation. But, you know, she had to, because if she hadn't, she was going to start as the most unpopular prime minister to ever start in history. But the point is, you can't, I think Leon's right. You can't see conviction in any of these people. We hear, for example, that Truss is a conviction politician because she's a convert to very rapidly laissez-faire free market economics. And they say Kwasi Kwarteng is a conviction politician. Maybe he is, I'll give him that. Maybe he is. James Cleverly, maybe he is. I don't know enough about their detailed background. But the trouble is, Baruch, and I think that Leon has put the finger on it really properly and accurately, they don't really stand for anything. Whereas Johnson stood for nothing, but he was a popular buffoon for some, and a very dangerous figure for others, they thought. I always heard more, perhaps foolishly, because I hadn't got enough experience of him directly, as a popular buffoon. But the point is now, it's sad to see most of the decent One Nation Tories have gone from the party at every level, significant level. They're there still. I mean, I know some decent Tories. They're good, decent people. They're there as members, and they're even in Parliament, some of them. But they're not running the show at all. It reminds me a little bit, Baruch, of what you said about when Corbyn was in charge of Labour. it's like all those decent mainstream figures were still there, but like all of a sudden they disappeared. It's a sad, sad thing. And the only party that stayed mainstream, whether we've moved a little left, a little right of the Liberal Democrat perspective, is our party here. And yet, sadly, however well we do in certain key seats where there's a weather vane telling us that, you know, we've got a chance, we never get up above 10 or 15% in the polls, and we could never really get high up in the seats because of what happened with the coalition. And when you bring up what happens with coalitions in Israel, obviously the only coalition we had here in 70 odd years, and it's turned out to be electorally a disaster for the Liberal Democrat Party. It's a great shame.
Be inspired by Yesh Atid. You know, the people said that you couldn't get a centrist party growing and growing, and Yesh Atid is growing and growing.
Yeah, but he's a big personality. As Leon said about Israeli politics relying a lot on personalities, the Liberal Democrats have never had, apart from Paddy Ashdown and Charles Kennedy, who both did, interestingly, they were the two leaders who saw growth in the party at electoral level. We don't have a lot of these big personality figures. I mean, most of our politics doesn't. Look at Truss. I mean, Ned Davey is a superstar personality compared with Liz Truss. So I don't know I still think personalities count for a lot. I think if Andy Burnham, for example, is leading Labour now, they'd be doing better than under Starmer.
Yes, but this was the beauty of having all these regional mayors. They could get rid of all the decent Labour MPs to go off and run mayorals, and they'd have power. They could do something in
it's true to
Liverpool and in Manchester and other places, but they're not in parliaments. They can't challenge the Conservatives.
If I can comment on British politics, the person who I blame more than Corbyn for what happened to the Labour Party was Ed Miliband. The Conservatives would not have had a look-in if David Miliband had been leading.
Oh, absolutely.
He would have been a brilliant prime minister.
Yeah.
And for a younger brother to come in and usurp his older brother,
ludicrous.
It's something that helped to make the Labour Party unpopular.
Yeah.
Because the country felt if that's what he's willing to do, then it's not somebody who can be trusted.
Plus, anyway, Ed Miliband wasn't really up to the job, let's face it.
No.
And also,
nice chap, a very nice chap, but my God, he was no use.
Nice chap, but a nice chap, except it is unthinkable to do what he did to his brother.
I think you make a good point. A nice chap who actually had a steely determination that would belie the niceness. You're right, because who would do that? You are right. I do agree with you on that. I've never heard of such a thing. Bobby Kennedy never, I'm not comparing them, my God, chalk and cheese, no comparison. But Bobby Kennedy never stood against Jack Kennedy. The younger brother served the brother. I mean, it's just mad.
I just have one last question for you, Baruch, which is something that I was mentioning earlier.
And I must go because I have an early game of tennis in the morning against somebody about 40 years younger than me, and I need to beat him.
How old are you, Baruch, if you don't mind me asking, the way you keep talking about your age? I don't mean that.
I'm 72.
Oh.
Well, you've...
Just a few years older than me. Very quickly, Baruch. One of the problems I feel is, to a large extent, the Israeli population is insulated from what's happening in Palestine, on the West Bank. Yes, they do. Some of the younger ones do reserve duty, and obviously their children go and do reserve duty. But in day-to-day life, and when I visited Israel, I haven't been for a few years recently because obviously with one thing and another, I'm hoping to get out next year.
You're welcome to come visit us, Leon.
I will do my best.
Any
one of the things I've noticed is what's happening on the West Bank doesn't affect daily life.
Yeah.
It's not reported properly inside Israel.
Yeah.
And many Israelis just ignore it. They think, well, it's there, it's always been there, and we can't do very much about it, so let's just carry on.
That is one of the problems. People are very bound up in their everyday life, in working, in paying mortgages. We also have problems with cost of living. We also had Corona, of course, low, although we are we seem to have risen far above it. Now we have 94 serious cases. Of every single one of the 94 serious cases has not been vaccinated. So we are very much over it. But at the time, with lockdowns, people were more worried about their day-to-day existence. Obviously, when there are terrorist attacks, it doesn't help. But Israel is used to terrorist attacks for all of its 70 years.
Yeah.
But you're very right. We try in the Forum of Peace organizations to publicize it. The fact that we're working together gives us a few 100,000 people rather than 10,000 here and 5,000 there. We've had a couple of major events. After the election, whoever wins, we will be going to into a much higher vein. At the moment, we have an internet campaign going on, which has reached a few 100,000 people. Obviously, you can see what on Facebook, how many people have clicked onto you, how many people have liked, how many people have commented, and it's having an effect. And we publicize all the time, either the individual organizations or we as a forum, what is going on in the West Bank, when the IDF are not responding in the way they should. I must say, as somebody who spent the last 4 years in the army before I came back to England, fighting in Lebanon in the first Lebanese war, or then afterwards invited to join the Special Forces or the reformed Givati Brigade. When you command young 18-year-olds who are being fired upon, it is very, very scary.
Yes.
And it's very hard for an 18-year-old or 19-year-old to react and think, I have to fire at legs, I have to fire in the air, I have to fire. When you're being shot at, if a bullet hits you, you die. It is very, very hard to react in a normal way. More and more young people are refusing to join the army. 4 young men went to prison last week because they refused to be called up. It is something that has to change. Like you, Leon, I'm a very proud major in Special Forces. On the wall behind me, I have my medal. I'm proud of, maybe we should almost finish on this, because I think it may sum up Israel. My view has not changed from 1974, when, having led a group of volunteers from from Britain's largest Zionist youth movement, the Federation of Zionist Youth, out to Israel during the Yom Kippur War to a kibbutz to replace the men who had gone off to fight. And I made up my mind then. I was chair or the leader of, we're finishing. I was leader of the Federation of Zionist Youth and chair of the Zionist Youth Council. And I made up my mind to stay in Israel and make Aliyah. And the Jewish Agency asked me to go back to England, lead FZY for another year, and publicize my Aliyah. And I wrote a monthly report for the Jewish Chronicle. And in my last report before December 1974, I said, I go to Israel with 2 aims. On the one hand, I will be the best soldier I can possibly be. This was when, before I joined the army, I was bullied at school. I was starting to become a sportsman, but the army was something for this boy from West London, very, very different. But I said I will be the best soldier I can possibly be to defend myself, my family, my friends, my people, my country against an existential threat. On the other hand, I will make it my business to have Arab friends, to get to know the Arab population, to get to know the Arab communities, and to enjoy the Middle Eastern part of Israel. And I've never wavered from it. So I was a proud soldier. I didn't agree with the war in Lebanon. I demonstrated on the Saturday night of the first Saturday night of the war in 1982 against the war. I was pleased that I wasn't being called up immediately because the World Cup was starting and I wanted to watch all the matches in Italy in the World Cup. But I was then called up the next day, and although I didn't agree with the war, I said, the army does not decide who it fights. The government decides who it fights. If you're a soldier, you have to go and fight. And I did. But in the years since I've come back, and even before, as I said, I was one of the 4 founders of Peace Now, I will go anywhere and talk to anybody about peace. I go to the West Bank, and I've never had a stone thrown at me, but obviously there is danger. But I will go anywhere and talk to anybody who wants to talk about peace. So that's the 2 sides of Israel. We are not as friendless as we were in the world. Please God, Netanyahu will not come back, which will then we will once again be a pariah state. But I'm much more optimistic.
Good.
As I wrote after the election 4 years ago, when he did win, 5 years ago, the next morning I said, don't despair. The sun is still shining. Israel's still a beautiful country. We have to go and work harder. And there is a new young generation that wants peace, that is connected to the internet, that sees the world around, that knows about climate change, that knows that there are bigger problems. Netanyahu will not last forever. Things change in an instant, as we know. Trump won't last forever. Putin won't last forever.
Okay. Thank you very much, Baruch. It's been a wonderful evening, and
it's lovely to talk to you.
hopefully when I do come out next year, we'll get a chance to come up and visit you.